Well, I will go ahead and get started so you all have the appropriate amount of time to speak. So welcome everyone. My name is Renee Stewart and I am an assessment specialist here at University of Arizona Global Campus. I am the host of this session, From Projects to Progress, helping teams learn forward through an agile approach. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. We have also enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, I am pleased to introduce to you Stephanie Kilby and Dr. Joe Cappa. Stephanie Kilby is the Director of Student Services here at UAGC, leveraging over 13 years of higher education experience to design student-centric systems that help adult learners persist, complete, and thrive. Dr. Joe Cappa is the Project Manager for Academic Innovation, Operations, and Technology at UAGC. With over 15 years in academic operations and online teaching, Dr. Cappa believes learning should be an experience and works to bridge theory with real-world practice at UAGC. Together, they are reimagining how agile practice can turn ideas into student-centered action and proving that agility isn't just a buzzword, it's a better way of working for student success. So Stephanie and Dr. Joe, take it away.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Renee. So excited to be here today to share with you a project that Joe and I worked on together over the past year, which is really a case study in applying an agile mindset to projects that are geared towards student success. But before we jump in, I want, for those of you that know me, are not going to be surprised by this, but I want to start with a little bit of a story and have you picture something in your mind. So imagine that you work in an actual building with walls, with desks, and in the building there's a conference room. And the conference room door never latches. It is so annoying. You sit in a meeting and the door swings open. You walk past and it swings back the other way. People try to keep the door closed because they shove a trash can against it. Latch won't work, so they're going to do whatever they can. Facilities comes by and they put a sign on the door. Door doesn't latch. Eventually, leadership says, we need a new door. So somebody goes and gets a quote. They form a committee. They build a project plan, and down the road, the door gets replaced. And what happens? New door doesn't latch. So because the foundation of the building had shifted over time, it was actually the door frame that became just slightly misaligned that was causing the door not to latch. So why do I tell you this story? Because the door was never the root problem. The frame was. When we fall in love with a solution, like replacing the door with a different door, we almost always assume that the problem is something that we can see. But when we get curious about the root cause, that's where we start to really find our success and our leverage. So how does that pertain to what we're going to talk about today? Agility does not assume that we know the answer every time we're trying to solve a problem. It assumes that we need to understand what's actually driving the problem. It assumes that we get smarter as we test and we learn and we iterate. And it also assumes that sometimes micro adjustments along the way get to a better solution than one big decision ever would. So my question as we walk through this for you to consider is, do you want a brand new door or do you want a door that actually closes? In agility, agile is the difference. It's not moving faster, it's moving smarter by learning your way to the solution. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So this session is about highlighting the Student Success Research and Development team, which was a very small team. And when I say team, not an official team, everybody still had their day job, but a team that we pulled together to really support research and development within the framework of student success at UAGC. And it's about using Senge's systems thinking model to address complex challenges. Specifically, this was for our students in their first year where we were seeing a large number of unsuccessful grades during that time period. So we're going to walk you through this and how we went from a traditional thinking approach, this is the solution and we're going to march toward it, to a systems thinking approach where we brought in data all the time. We sought to learn, to collaborate, to iterate, to reach a solution that was better than something we could have imagined from the beginning. Joe, would you like to share a little bit about this?
Yeah, so before we jump into that, what I would say is, as a project manager looking to take the PMP exam, I've done a lot of looking and studying about Agile, and so I was thinking, could we take a project to UAGC and try the Agile model? And Stephanie was gung-ho enough to try this with Student Success Research and Development team, and to be quite honest with you, I had no idea it was going to turn out as good as it did. And so that is a kudos to Stephanie and team for really embracing the mindset. What you see in front of you here is really how we operate at UAGC, not so much internally, but the external factors that we deal with. And VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We deal with all of those, right, from the higher education industry, and especially now where there are even more changes going on in terms of the Department of Education and so on. What I really want to focus on, though, is the two puzzle pieces at the bottom, one for continuous improvement and one for internal reflection. And so to Stephanie's point, we had the Student Success Committee had looked at the challenge that Stephanie had been talking about for quite a long time, and they got some progress, but not really where they wanted to be. So we talked about how could we put a model together where we could iterate and we could improve on a continuous basis, but then also have time to really have that internal reflection, think about what we did, iterate through what we did, and then move forward with a more holistic approach to the project. So that's kind of why we threw this VUCA up here for you guys to gain additional context. And a little bit more here. So two things. For the learning organization, right, for this project, was a framework, as to Stephanie's point, where we had continuous learning, skill development, and institutional agility, and that was really the team. And then at the bottom there, in terms of the internal reflection, we took time to transform this problem, right, by shifting, having some guardrails around stability and governance. However, we spent a lot of time with reflection, experimentation, and sharing inquiry in terms of what worked and what didn't work. And I will credit that to Stephanie, because in the Agile space, there is no project manager really, but there is a coach, facilitator, and she did a great job of doing that. That's why I say embracing this process, because it's brand new to us, and there really is no playbook. It is really learn as you go. Next slide.
Thanks, Joe. So what was the setup for this, right? What we're talking about is addressing a challenge that has been around, as Joe said, for a long time, understanding that we don't have all this additional bandwidth to try new things all of the time, to take a different approach. But it's also understanding that it's all in the setup, right? The approach is how you work. It doesn't need to take extra time. It's just a different way of thinking about things. And so I want to talk just a little bit of how we operationalized being a learning organization as opposed to just talking about it in various settings. Like, how do we live that? So there were some key strategies, and these are fairly formal. I'm going to share a little bit more about what does that mean in real life. But key strategies around developing adaptive leadership capacity. This was about ensuring that the people in the room had the skills needed to navigate ambiguity, especially volatility, that they had some voices when it comes to thinking and collaboration. So really leaning into leadership capacity, not necessarily to lead other teams of people, but to make sure that their voice was one that would be influential. It was about fostering reflection and knowledge sharing. That can be hard. We don't always feel that we're in a safe space. We do a lot of defensiveness of our current practices. So how do we get to a space as a small team to say, we have to create space to reflect, we have to share knowledge, we have to build some trust. That was in part what taking this approach was meant to do. It also is about continuous improvement, recognizing that The design was in the thinking and the learning that would lead to more thinking and more learning and more iteration, not letting perfect be the enemy of progress, right? Where can we start and then where do we want to take it? We wanted to build innovation networks. So how do we think different? You actually have to create space to do that. You can't just tell people to do it and then give them a project plan that looks like the same marching orders that they always get. Build in space for innovation. And finally, align the structure with learning goals. Why was this really important? This was about rewarding experimentation, rewarding big idea thinking, sharing the accountability for it, and then taking it back across the organization to say, hey, like we approached this different and guess how much deeper our learning and understanding is. So what did this look like in real life, right? How might we do this? Just a few things that I shared with the team and would have to reiterate with them and with myself to remind us what our purpose was and what our approach was. It was about staying curious. Even when you feel the pressure of having to come up with a solution, don't lose your curiosity. Find diverse perspective. Ask a lot of people what they think. Look for feedback in places you haven't before. Go a layer deeper. Continue to make progress even when things are uncertain. That's a little bit of a muscle we don't always flex, but we need to do that. Ambiguity is okay, but it doesn't need to stall our progress. This was about leading change with others. So the SSRD group, the research and development team, is a group of leaders. They didn't necessarily need to have a person leading them. They were all the leaders in the room. So how do they do that together? How do we make sure that we're not listening to one voice over others, but that it's a collective effort? And finally, I just have to reiterate this: experiment, iterate, learn, and keep pursuing better solutions. And we're going to show you how we did just that.
So Steph, I wanted to just,
oh, go ahead.
Steph, real quick before you do that. One of the key tenets of the Agile mindset in why there is no project manager is it is a servant leadership approach. And so everything Stephanie talked about on the last slide, she really had to take a servant leadership approach, whereas she said she did less leading per se and more removing roadblocks, coaching, and encouraging. So I think that's important because, again, without that, you don't really have an Agile approach. So I just wanted to reinforce that.
Yes, thank you. So what was the scope of our project? So I mentioned that it was about unsuccessful grades in the first year. And I did develop a project scope statement. This was really important because it's easy to get in the weeds of something. And the purpose of this was to ground us in the work that we were doing. So the purpose of the project was to propose solutions to address and mitigate unsuccessful grades with the focus on students in year one at UAGC. This phrasing was really intentional. Notice how it doesn't say the purpose of this project is to implement X solution. That's not what this was about. This was about, oh, we might need to find and propose some solutions. So let's not close ourselves off from the beginning. We're approaching it with the idea that we will learn, and we will find multiple ways that we might address this. Maybe we take on all of them, maybe we take on one, but it wasn't about marching toward a predetermined end. It was that we were going to find it together along the way. So the deliverable that I asked for was just that we would have 2 to 3 testable solutions that would address the scope. Pretty simple and also a little bit daunting, because I don't know about you guys, but when I have a project, it's great to know exactly what somebody's asking for. And in this, it was not about that. But again, being okay with ambiguity was a huge part of it. I did share with them that I had some must-haves, some nice-to-haves, and we identified what was not in scope. So what did we need to have? A student-first approach. This was not about sitting on the organizational side and saying, here's what would be great for the bottom line or for enrollment numbers or anything like that. This was about our students, which is where student success really needs to lie. So in everything that we did, what's the student-first approach? This had to be about unsuccessful grades within the first year, not because unsuccessful grades later on aren't a challenge, but that we had to narrow it in to be able to not lose ourselves in the enormity of the ask. We had to keep an eye on equity. It wasn't just about helping one group or another. Are the solutions that we're finding and proposing going to have equitable impact on all of our students in this range? And we're going to have a time limit. And that sounds a little rigid when you hear me talking about ambiguity and things like that. But the time limit was important because we had a meeting coming up in 60 days where we needed to present to a larger group. And I had to say, we're not going to do this forever. This is not going to be a committee that goes on with no end, and we keep asking for more data and we keep asking for more analysis. What we get is what we get in 60 days, and we're going to be prepared to share that and recommend next steps. What would be nice to have? A range of solutions. I said it'd be great to have a quick win. It'd be great to have a long-term thing that might, we might need to think about budget impact, something larger. That's okay. Have a range so that we can be very strategic about what we might choose to move forward with. And we're not closing ourselves off to something just because we think it won't happen or that it's too easy of a win. So range of potential solutions, the ability to test. We don't always have to like launch something big. Let's try it out first, see if it's doing what we intended, and then learn from it and grow it and scale it. And then one recommendation for quick implementation. At the end of the day, is there something that we could recommend that would be a quick win while we work towards other things? So those were my nice to haves. Something that I shared with them, not in scope. Again, really important to identify to be able to say, like, let's get back on track. We weren't going to change grading policies. We weren't going to recommend changes to registrar policies, no changes to the academic catalog. And we had a lot of data to work with. So while we logged requests that we might want to look at, we were not going to ask for any more data. Too easy to get lost, right? We have enough to be able to move forward and learn quickly and together without having these extra data requests, which is also another space where a traditional project management style sometimes can get lost in the muck because every time you get data, what do you want? More data. So this was about, let's use what we have. And
one
with,
thing,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Steph, one thing I want to just jump in on, and this, again, this was a tribute to Stephanie. We looked at the ELT as the customer. And so if you look at the ready to present in 60 days, that was really the MVP. And the idea here is we would bring that to the ELT and say, okay, you're the customer. Tell us what you do. It was called, it'd be a demonstration. Tell us what you see here. Tell us what you want. Tell us what you don't want. And then we really go back. So the idea here is, to Steph's point, the project, and again, this is where we live in ambiguity. The project wasn't to have something concrete. The project was to go back to the ultimate customer and say, have we hit the mark the way you see it? So.
Yep. All right, you're probably already starting to guess why we chose this approach for this particular team, but I just want to call out a few things about why this team really needed to choose Agile to move forward. This was not just about a process, this was about the mindset that we took. It was about moving faster, moving smarter, learning together, delivering value as you go. And that's something Joe's going to talk about in just a minute. At every turn, there was value add, value add, value add as the learning was happening, which in and of itself became a great motivator for the team because every time they looked, they were learning something new. And what an awesome thing to be able to give to a group of people who often feel stretched for time and like they're working under a lot of pressure. So this approach really helped us stay flexible. It helped us to collaborate, to be safe across teams, to turn insights into action. Great, we learned this. What could it mean? What could we do? And to build a culture of continuous improvement where we were okay with learning as we went because it was a different way of approaching these complex problems that we see, which is very typical in student success. Challenges are complex, challenges are large scale, and challenges are evolving. The challenge today might look different next week and the week after. So how do we keep up? We need to be a little bit more adaptable in our mindset and the way that we're looking at the problem. Joe, anything you'd share about the chart on the right of the screen?
Yeah. So what I would say here is that, and one of the things that Steph and I talked about is sometimes we sit in projects, in meetings, and they go on forever. And we bring new research, we bring new data, but we never really move. And so if you look at the Agile methodology here, this is a continuously moving circle. So there's nowhere in the circle where you stop. You continuously move, iterate, and learn. And that was unique. And I'll say, some of the leaders that have been on this, have been around for quite a while, were initially a little reluctant, but then I think as they did this, they were like, yeah, we really like this because there was less stagnation and there was more progress. Even if it was small, it was progress. So, and you can see here, this was a mindset change. We're not looking to change process. We were looking to change everybody's mindset around how we approach projects like this?
So a little bit more in the weeds of how I set it up so that we would be set up for success, because this is where some great value came in. So if you work with a large team, if you work on a lot of projects, there might be something in here for you. So we talked about this was a 12-member team it was cross-functional, made up of leaders and people with voices across the institution who are all bringing a different experience, a different knowledge set, and also different daily roles. They still have jobs to do. So I'm asking them to do this on top of that. How are we going to approach this? And so what I said is, let's do this. We have a Teams page that's a shared space for all of us. This is where we're going to collaborate asynchronously. We can store our data files, our findings, anything we get. It's all going to live in this Teams page. But for the group of 12, we're going to break up into 3 different groups of 4. And what that did was it gave those smaller groups an opportunity to establish their own norms. And what do I mean by that? Their own way of communicating, their own expectations for how often would they meet? How would they meet? What are the roles and responsibilities within that group? So instead of me having to schedule meetings and time for 12 people to get together, now 4 smaller groups are just doing that within themselves. And it was anything goes. Here's the goal at the end of the sprint. You work as a small group to figure out how you're going to meet that goal. And that gave people an opportunity to get creative, to really listen to each other, and not have to go to the whims of a large group, but rather to manage it in a small group. It accelerated idea generation. How much quickly can you share ideas across just a couple people versus a large group where we're competing for screen time and space? So this really gave us an opportunity to take a group of 12 and split it even further to keep moving toward a common goal. Now, it still was important that we had some cohesion as a larger group and transparency about what was happening and what we were learning. So every 2 weeks, we did have a standing team meeting where we would all come together for different purposes, which we'll talk about in a minute, but to basically share learning and where our recommendations were to go next. We also had stand-ups 3 times a week, but I didn't ask for people to log in at a certain time. Instead, we did it in Teams as a virtual stand-up. On those mornings, I would pose some questions and just ask people throughout the day, go in and comment and share, and that would take the place of team meeting. And then we also built in time after every cycle to reflect. What did we learn? Not just about the project that we're working on, but about the process and the approach that we're taking. What's working well for you? What's not? What do we need to address right now? What might we save for the next time that we do something like this? And this type of rhythm gave people control of the work without fatigue, and it kept that learning cycle going continuously throughout. So I'm going to turn over to Joe, and he's going to talk through a little bit more about what these sprints look like.
So one of the things, and thanks, Steph, one of the things that Steph and I talked about is how do we present this to the group so where they don't feel like it is just another project, right? So we went in there and said, okay, we are going to take 4 main ideas and we are going to really call them things that we've never called them before. So we've really never done grounding work in evidence. We've never done a big idea solutioning, at least early on. We've never really done idea refinement and this idea of widening the lens. So these things were different. And you see this diamond model here. What we talked about is, okay, how do we give the team small wins? And so the first sprint, which for us, I believe the sprints were 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks. It's a small diamond. It's what are we going to get out of that? And so you see the first sprint here. And I know this looks almost like an octopus and really busy, but it wasn't. We have execution up there. That is what we wanted to complete by the end of the time. We planned and we planned with the team. We planned and we planned. The virtual stand up, as Steph said, that gave us the ability to look at blockers, challenges, and the learnings. And then Stephanie created the 4 L's. I'm going to let her really jump in here and talk about the 4 L's. I thought that was awesome, but I really want her to share kind of where that came from.
Sure. So the 4 L's was really about reflection on what's going well and what's not. So it was as basic as this. What did you love about this sprint the past 2 weeks? What did you loathe about this sprint over the past 2 weeks? What did you long for and what did you learn? And what was really fascinating is that through this process, these leaders across the organization coming at things with a different approach, the things that they loved were the ability to think creatively, to be able to choose when and where they spend their time and to still feel like there was progress happening, to hear perspective of other groups. That one was a little surprising to me because I think, wow, we are in meetings together all the time, but how often do we just get to actually work together and learn from each other? Um, Things that they loathed was not having enough time. They wanted more time to be able to dig in. They wanted more data. What we found through the process, so this is just about the first 2 weeks sprint one, but what we found through the process is that the things that they loathed, they also ended up feeling were necessary for progress in this model. The last thing was the things that, oh, I'm sorry, there's 2 more, longed and learned for. So what did you long for? We talked about time. And what did you learn? And learning really centered around things that were eye-opening to them because they got to the next level of the conversation. So I shared the story about the door at the beginning. They got past the latch. They started to learn more about the root causes. And here's people who have been with the university for a while in a variety of roles, learning something new about our students, learning something new about the challenge. And so we logged the 4 Ls. Everybody was required to share. We put it in a chart for everybody to be able to see, and then we tracked it every sprint. We added to the 4 Ls chart.
So I want to talk about the retrospective real quick. And I think there was a little bit skepticism at first, because if you notice there, we did not the first sprint was not about the data. The first sprint was about the insights that we could probably glean from the data. And our natural mode is data, data, data. Let's chase that data. Let's come to a finite solution. And that was not it. It was about what could we learn beyond the data. And again, I think that was a little bit of a challenge first for folks. But if you see sprint two, now we have everybody in sprint two. And now we said, hey, look, we're going to do something different. We're going to grab big ideas now. And this was a no constraints zone where throw everything at the wall. Think boldly, step outside the box. We put a sprint planning on that of narrow scope, no constraints, but think big. The retrospective here was interesting. We said, let's do a big idea showcase. And again, there was no, this is the final, we got to charge forward. This is what would we present as some of our big ideas. And again, I think there was a little trepidation from the team because that's not something that we're used to doing. So then we moved to sprint three. And these sprints, again, were all 2 to 3 weeks. Sprint three is where we said, okay, look, before we present this to the ultimate customer, we're going to do some refinement. And we actually went to the SSC as a customer and said, okay, SSC, tell us what your feedback is here. And again, I think that was new for the SSC and it was new for the SSRD because we really weren't asking the SSC to do nothing more than look at this from a customer standpoint. And then again, the retrospective, and this one, I love this one, where we said, okay, let's go back and bring a critical eye to what we did. Not a critical eye in terms of criticizing each other, but a critical eye to, is this what we want to present? Is this our MVP? And if not, what do we want to bring to that? And then the last sprint, actually, we took a little bit more time before we presented, and we said, okay, let's get the feedback. Let's do a little bit of testing. Let's then share the finding. And again, before we went to the ELT, we went to a different customer, which is the SSC, and we said, okay, SSC, here is our findings, and here's where we want to go. And we gave them one last chance to chime in. Again, not to change what we did, but to chime in. And then I'm going to let Steph give a little bit expanding on this, on how this went to stock take and or what some of the initial leadership responses on this, especially from Blake, who's our senior VP.
Sure. So before I move to the next slide, which has my lessons learned on it, I want to call out a couple of things. One is we talked about the big idea sprint. This was something that I do think there was some trepidation around, and then there was so much engagement and excitement. You could feel how people were excited about this because how often do we get asked to come up with a solution and then we immediately have constraints? Come up with a solution, but make sure you stay in budget and make sure that it's within this amount of time and make sure that you don't use too many resources. It's like, wow, my thinking is already constrained and constricted. This was about, don't worry about all of that. what are your big ideas? What are the things that would really make a splash? Think big, because we'll get to this refinement. And then that critical eye was like, okay, how might we do some of these big things, even knowing that we could have some challenges with some different things. So it was about starting big and then narrowing it down, as opposed to starting narrow and expecting people to be able to be creative. And that's where we saw some real wins with this.
So I don't want to downplay the virtual stand-ups, but I do want to say this. This was new, right? Because typically in an agile project, you do the stand-ups weekly, or you do the stand-ups very, very frequently. But Steph said to me, that is going to burn people out. So what if we use Teams in a different way and just say, hey, look, this is your space. Nobody's coming in here. It's a safe space, and let's just keep this open virtually for 3 weeks, or for the duration of the sprint. And what I was pleasantly surprised to is people really went in there and owned it, and it was a safe space, and there was no worry that somebody from senior leadership was going to get access to this and go in there and read it. It really was their space, and in fact, Steph went to great lengths to make sure that it was locked. And only the members of the team had access. I think myself, Steph, and the members of the team, and that was it. And that was deliberate so that they could really embrace that self-space concept. So, Steph, take it away.
Thanks, Joe. So what did we learn? Well, I don't have them on the slide. I wish I would have put them on the slide. We ended up with something like, it was like 15 or 16 solutions ranging across many different areas, small to large, communication to support to resources. Like the thought that in this very short time frame, we were able to come up with this range of solutions to address a complex problem really spoke to the idea that there's not always just one solution. You have to learn as you go, because they were things that some of which had never been presented before. And so this idea that if you give people the time, the space, and just some very loose structure, they will grow the project. They'll deliver something that you could have never imagined. So where possible, let's stop putting some friction on the front end, and give people that space to be able to come up with things that we haven't thought of yet. We were able to keep momentum. So each sprint was 2 weeks. I think there was one that was 3 weeks just because of, I don't remember why, but one was 3 weeks. Other than that, having those very short time frames with minimal check-ins along the way was helpful, because it made us stay focused on progress while still having that ability to flex within the time to do what we needed to. We moved from insight to action fast because we had to. But because we were dedicating it, our minds truly were always on that project. It was like in our day to day, still thinking about, oh, like with this impact and what might I add into the Teams page and what does this mean and how could we do it? It was really exciting to see the chat, to hear people share. Some of the virtual stand-ups were about teasing out the things you're excited for and what you might want to do next. And that really helped keep the momentum going and the learning happening. It also gave people ownership of a problem. I mean, if I asked you who owns the problem of unsuccessful grades, it's like all of us and none of us, and who's going to drive this? Like this gave a team ownership of something that is a real challenge for our students and for us as an institution. So where else could we model this? Because we have a lot of those across the boards. So where else might we try this approach? There was some great trust built and strong relationships within these groups of people who knew each other well, who have worked together for a long time in various settings. But this was about coming together and tackling a very specific problem. And because of that, they were able to grow their relationships in a different way, which I still see evidence of in the work that we're doing in the meetings that we're in. And I also learned the composition of the team matters. This was not a random pull of people. This was about identifying and asking for feedback from leaders, from teams across the university. Who would you recommend for this group? Who will be able to share knowledge? Who has an influential voice with their team? Who's quick to pick up on data? Who's a leader? A range of things to say we need a great cross section of people in this room that will drive this project. And that made all the difference as well. Were they the only people that could do this? No, but it was very intentional to get that right mix in. And now my next steps will be like, how do we find more of this mix to have a stronger voice in more of the work that we're doing? So where do I want to go next? One, I want to keep Joe by my side because he really helped organize, drive, keep the mindset there for this type of approach. And we really needed that type of forward thinking growth mindset in action, which I was so thankful to have a great partner with in doing this. There are some things with Agile that Joe could probably talk to better, but that we didn't really follow the script. That was because we knew this had to be adapted to work for us. So in Agile, really the team should have done all of the planning and established the framework. That's just not the world that we were living in. So I designed the sprints and I designed the early markers. I would like to include the team in more of the planning, but I also recognize that that's a whole project in and of itself. When you do have short time and a very specific problem you're addressing, it's helpful to have that structure. So I like to find a better balance there. The data-driven iteration. What did we learn and where do we go with that learning is the key. And then what did we learn again and where do we go next? Having that cycle of sharing practices and iterating was so powerful. And that's something that whether or not you run a project like this, you can build that into your daily work and the things that you're tackling. I've been toying with like, could we have a larger group that we pull from for various projects? So it's not the same 12 people that carry the burden of the work, but being able to say like, hey, group of 40 people that have been identified, I need 6 people for the next 4 weeks, and here's the project we're working on. Who's with me? And that I think will help reduce some of the still tight bandwidth constraints that we're seeing, because that was the common feedback from the group was that they'd love to do this all the time, and it's just not realistic because we don't have a dedicated team. They're also doing other work in their daily roles. Creating a visible backlog, so huge. The ideas that came out of that, I said we shared like 15 or 16, and there were probably like 15 or 16 more things that was like, we want to look into this later. Remember I said no extra data requests. We have a backlog. We could probably learn more if we asked for this other data, if we looked at it in this way. So how do we catalog that? So the next group that comes together can build off of what we learned and not start fresh from scratch. Having a lessons learned library or someplace we can go where we can see all of the work already done across the university and build off of each other's work would be really powerful. Normalizing test and learn. We hear test and learn a lot. This really goes toward learning organization. We don't have to try everything full scale off the bat. Where do we have an opportunity to run a little test? Determine if it's scalable, what that would look like. Determine if it's effective. Learn, iterate, grow. Learn, iterate, grow. So we just need to become more comfortable with saying that and doing that. It's okay. It's okay for something to go wrong, especially if we're doing a small test and learn. That's when it should go wrong. But what do we learn? Learn forward from this stuff. And finally, celebrate what we learn as much as what we accomplish. Who's been in a project and the biggest celebration is we launched it? That's great. Launching it that's what we're trying to do. But is that where the celebration should lie, or is it in the effectiveness? Is it what we learned along the way? Is it what we're going to drive forward? So having the celebration of learning was really fantastic, because in a room full of educators and people in higher education, like to see light bulb moments, to see the excitement around finding out something new, it was like, oh man, like I feel like I'm missing that in my daily life. And so where do we have opportunity to celebrate the lessons learned along the way?
So if I could just, go ahead,
I'll
Steph.
turn it over to you, Joe, to close us out. But I
No,
just want to say, if I have like one key takeaway for everybody in this room is try it. It is such an awesome approach that you can learn and adapt to what you need, even if it's just like one little piece of this that you want to try, do it. And tell me what you learned from it, because guess what? I'm going to keep learning and trying and growing.
so I'll wrap us up. So one of the things that as I've been reading the literature and Steph and I did, certainly there are guidelines for Agile. However, you can tailor Agile to your institution. And this was tailoring it to what we have. The things Stephanie talked about future forward, we may wind up having a team, to Stephanie's point, that is pulled off and to do this type of stuff. The other thing I wanted to share with you guys is risk. So I had permission from my boss, and Stephanie sort of had permission, and we just went at it. And what we did not think is, how would this be perceived to the ELT? Because again, it is something we never did before. The last thing is, as I said, there really wasn't a project manager. And on the business side of the house, we have strict projects and waterfall. And we just said, look, we are going to do this thing. And so I think there was some trepidation around who's running the show. But we really came back and said, look, in the Agile space, there's team members, there's facilitators, there's coaches. There really is not one traditional leader, if you will. And I think that was the key to success, because the leaders that are on this team that have been for quite a while are used to that approach, and they went, really? We can do this and there's going to be no backlash, and that was the truth. So I'm looking forward to where we go next with this, and certainly, Steph, I will stay with you because I think there's a lot more cool stuff we can do on the horizon. Thank you all very much, and now we'll turn it over back to our host.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Joe. That was super informative and that was a great presentation. And thank you everyone in the audience for joining into today's session. Please don't forget to use the survey linked in the chat to nominate TLC presentations for conference awards and share your feedback with this presentation. I hope you all have a wonderful day and we'll see you in the next presentation.
Thanks, everyone.